Excellent. So welcome, everyone. We are really glad that you've joined us for our monthly Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion gathering here with Q Christian Fellowship. Each month, we come together to explore how our faith intersects with the fullness of our identities across race and gender and sexuality, ability, class, and more. These gatherings are a part of how we live into our values as a community committed to justice and belonging. Sometimes we hear from folks within our own QCF community, and other times we're honored to welcome guests who share from their lived experiences and their own journeys. So no matter what the topic or the format, our goal is the same: to grow in compassion, expand our imagination, and build a faith community where all of us can be seen, valued, and celebrated. So as we begin, we want to invite you tonight to listen deeply, to stay curious, and to take care of yourselves in whatever way you need to during our time together. This is a space for honest, open-hearted reflection, and you are welcome here just as you are. So tonight, Shay Washington will facilitate a session about shared power, conflict, and accountability, and we will discuss cultivating liberative relationships. This is an interactive workshop, and it'll invite everyone here, or if you are listening on the internet, to examine power in connection with conflict and accountability. Together, we will explore how to move in more liberative ways, care for ourselves, particularly as folks who are already on the margins, and turn towards each other when conflict happens instead of turning against each other. So whether you've caused hurt or been the recipient of hurt, and haven't we all been in roles, all of these roles at some point, you will leave with practical ways of living out an ethic of shared power within your day-to-day life and tools for fostering connections rooted in trust, care, and repair. So we are excited to learn together and to see what emerges when we bring our whole selves into sacred conversation. With that, let's jump in, and I'll pass it over to Shay to introduce herself and take us into the session.
I just really appreciate being here tonight, Carrie, QCF. Thank you so much for having me. Like Carrie said, my name is Shay Washington. I use she, her pronouns. My home is in Washington, D.C., where I am now, and it's the ancestral lands of the Anacostan and Piscataway Indigenous people. Just a little introduction. This is me as a little Black queer baby, a little rainbow butterfly on my shoulder, and some things that I love, like the color purple and the ocean, musicals, being an auntie, just so you can know me a little bit on a personal level. Um, I do this work professionally, consulting, facilitating, and training on issues of social justice, helping groups and individuals understand systems of dominance and work to break those down and recreate something more liberative for all of us. I want to give you all just an overview of what we're going to do tonight. And while I do that, if you haven't already introduced yourself in the chat, I would love it if you shared whatever you felt like sharing, name, pronouns, where you're joining from, whose lands you're on, why you wanted to attend tonight. And whatever else you want me to know. I'm a 2 on the Enneagram, which means I really love knowing all the things about all the people and building relationships. So here's our agenda. After introductions, I'm going to do just a brief reading for some spiritual grounding. We will explore conflict and kind of talk about what it is and what it brings up for us. We will explore power. And then we're going to put it all together and figure out how do we do conflict through the lens of shared power. And you'll have the opportunity to either self-reflect on your own in a breakout space where you won't be expected to talk to people, or to go into a breakout space where you would like to be in conversation for folks. So be thinking about which feels good to you. And then after that breakout time, we will come back and kind of share and build on the collective wisdom of the group. I am seeing some beloveds in my life in this Zoom space, and I'm grateful for their love and just grateful to be here with all of y'all. Here is our spiritual grounding reading. It's called God is Here Too. Come, Come into the place where God listens, where you need no money, no status, no fine clothes. Come as you are, broken, whole, sick, well, satisfied, or with deep needs. Come to sing, come to cry, come to hear, come to see, to feel. Come and be ready, or come to be made ready. We are here. God is here too. That is from liturgies below, and I just use it to hopefully welcome us, ground us, and to say that whatever is coming in the room with you tonight is welcome here. I know we are all carrying so much, but we get to be here together, and that God is with us too. So, this workshop, Shared Power, Conflict, and Accountability, my hope is to really guide us in conversation around conflict and power. I want to offer a framework for understanding various forms of power and ways that we can be intentional about cultivating liberative relationships, even when we are moving through conflict. I know that we don't have a ton of time together, and so we are really just going to begin this conversation, but my hope is that we will get to learn from each other and leave feeling more inspired and equipped based off of the collective wisdom here. And y'all, just so much harm and evil is happening in the world, and I feel like we are increasingly being conditioned in this like us against them mentality. And we are being led through fear and control to grow our list of thems, which shrinks who we consider us. And I just feel like we need each other, like as many of us as possible, particularly for us on the margins. And that this is how we ally each other. This is how we take care of each other. So much is out of our control, but what we do have impact over are our actions, are our reactions. We have impact over the ways that we be with one another, the types of communities that we build, how we cultivate and tend to those communities. This is how we care for each other in an increasingly hostile world that wants us to turn against each other instead of turning toward each other. I believe that we can choose to resist this plan, and that we can lean into being more human humans, that we can choose to move in love even when we're dealing with conflict that arise between us, between the folks that you consider your people. And conflict is hard. And we don't often have healthy examples, and we haven't grown up in safe spaces to practice. Many of us, some of us have. But I feel like just like we need to practice other skills to get better at them, we need safe spaces to also practice healthy conflict and repair. And that's why I really wanted to do this workshop. So I hope that resonates, and that y'all will join me into this. In this time. Before we dive in, let me just level set and be clear about some expectations in terms of what this workshop is not. It's not about resolving more toxic forms of harm like abuse and coercion. Tonight, we're really going to talk about more minor, though still serious and painful forms of hurt that we can go through, especially when undealt, or if they are dealt with in unhealthy ways, they can lead to larger ruptures. This workshop is unfortunately not going to bring down the racist, ableist, cis hetero patriarchy on its own, although it will give you some of the necessary framework and tools. And unfortunately, it's not going to get us any closer to having a queer host for the ultimatum queer love. I just want to be clear about that. And it's on my heart. I don't know if it's on yours. So here we go. I'm going to ask you on what you chose to note take on. So just think about conflict for a moment. And to just jot down some notes or maybe just reflect in your head. When you think about engaging in conflict, what do you notice happening in your body? So if you just want to write down sensations, what do you notice about your heartbeat? What do you notice about your breath? Just anything as you consider conflict. Someone confronting you, you confronting someone. Maybe you start in a regular conversation and things escalate. What happens in your body? And now just write down what emotions come up. What feeling words do you get when you deal with or consider thinking about engaging in conflict? Something that feels comfortable, uncomfortable, sad? Does it make you angry? And then what about any sort of thoughts or memories that come up, stories that are familiar for you in conflict? And then lastly, just jot down a few notes when you think about just sort of overall you in conflict. What do you already know about yourself? Is conflict something that you're comfortable with? Do you feel like you have the tools? Do you notice that you try to avoid conflict? Do you move toward it? And I'm wondering if just maybe two people would be willing to share in response to what you just reflected on, sort of whatever from the prompts came up for you or what you noticed overall. Takers. You can also feel free to use the chat. And Carrie, if you see the chat, I'm having a hard time looking at all the screens. So,
Sure, somebody offered in the chat fear of losing people.
that's real.
Someone offered anxiety, feeling tense, tending to withdraw, avoidance, or feeling inadequate. Someone else offered that they initially tend to downplay their own feelings that are labeled as tumultuous or challenging and bring forward the positive.
Yeah.
And someone else offers that they try to be mindful, they mindfully engage with conflict as they tend to be confrontational and often need to take a beat.
Got it. Okay. Thanks, Shaw, for sharing all of that. All of that resonates so much. Yeah, I feel all of that so deeply. For me, the avoidance piece, like I tried to come up with a feeling word when I was like, how would I express when I think about conflict, how I feel? And all I could come up with was no. Like I just everything in my body tightens. I don't want it. And particularly when it comes to like someone that I love sharing with me like some way that I hurt them. And it's not them sharing with me that I reel against. Like I really want that ultimately because I know that that gets us to a better place. It's the fact that like I have to contend with being a flawed human and making mistakes and not always loving as well as I want to. And I also know that like when I'm in a direct conflict with someone, like let's say it starts as a conversation and it's escalating, if I don't feel like I'm being heard and shrink, I can start shrinking back. I can do that sort of invisible thing, put my emotions to the side, sort of take a more avoidant posture and withdraw. Um, and that is connected to just stories that I tell myself about my needs being less important based off of my upbringing and all these things that feel like, real personal to share in this space, but it's a safe space. So so much can come up, and there's such a range of reasons for our experiences and our reactions to conflict. Recently, as I was preparing for this, I kept seeing all these things on Instagram that were so connected. And so I just want to share a few of these statements that I saw on Instagram from a couple of different creators, and just kind of consider what resonates for you as you listen to these. So it says many people assume a good relationship is one without arguments, but secure relationships aren't conflict free, they're repair rich. If you didn't grow up seeing healthy repair, conflict may feel like danger, like abandonment, rejection, or failure. So you shut down or explode or try to make it disappear. You don't need to avoid rupture. You need the tools to return after it happens. And that return, that's where trust is built. That's where nervous systems learn it's safe to stay in connection. Because if we simply avoid conflict or push things down, we might forget in the short term, but over time, we train our nervous system to believe the relationship isn't emotionally safe. And that's what quietly builds resentment. Let's normalize repair in relationships, if for no one else than that sensitive inner child who was left alone to process pain and confusion, who had to navigate rupture alone, who learned to bypass as a coping strategy, who learned that connection and belonging meant abandoning their emotional truth. Let's not perpetuate wounds of emotional abandonment and instead develop relational skill and capacity. Let's normalize conflict as a pathway to deeper intimacy in relationship. So we all have this, these little child versions of us, I believe, inside of us, our inner child, our child within, that learned how to cope and how to survive and how to keep ourselves safe. Um, and sometimes we can utilize those tools and those tactics um, in situations where we're not actually under threat, right? Sometimes we are so used to doing these things that unless we've been able to intentionally figure out, like, okay, these are the things that I do, and this is why I do it, and then practice a different way. Our nervous systems, we go back to the things that we always did. And those things were really important for us at various points in our lives to keep us safe, to help us survive. My therapist calls those brilliant adaptations. But sometimes, uh, they have benefits and drawbacks at this stage in our life and our adulthood, because in some ways they can keep us safe, but they can also prevent us from having the types of relationships that we really want. So ultimately, we have to be in touch with, like, what are our deepest desires when it comes to relationships and community and personal growth. So let's look at what conflict is. Here's a definition. Conflict is the meeting place of two or more seemingly oppositional beliefs, needs, positions, or goals. It seems simple enough, but we know that it's complex. What are some foundational things that we know about conflict? I tried to come up with a list. I wrote, conflict can be uncomfortable. And sometimes we stop right there. We feel like it's uncomfortable, so it's a no. But the discomfort, even though it doesn't always feel good, um, it isn't always bad, right? And it doesn't always have to indicate threat. Depending on how those oppositional beliefs and needs and positions are handled, conflict can cause hurt and do harm. But that doesn't have to be the end of the story, because conflict can present an opportunity for repair. And repair can help us to deepen our connections with each other, express and get our needs met, and meet the needs of those that we care about through turning toward each other and working to repair harm and hurt. Self-reflection, awareness, and accountability are necessary for repair, and all of these things can feel really scary and awful. But the more we practice and cultivate safe spaces to practice in, the less scary and awful we will feel. And then this definition of accountability, I just wanted to offer because I feel like the word gets thrown around a lot, but sometimes we don't really fully kind of look at what it means. So accountability is recognizing and taking responsibility for one's actions, acknowledging the impact of those actions, taking steps to repair the harm as much as possible, and making the changes necessary not to repeat that harm in the future. Is there anything that y'all would add to this list, just in terms of, basic foundational, what we know about conflict, something that you feel like it's important to add? Yeah.
I don't know if there's a phrase or a word for this, but Adrienne Marie Brown talks about how um, something to the effect of like the most vulnerable person in the room gets to decide what justice is. So
Mm,
I don't think that this is a conflict, but the most vulnerable person in the room says this hurts, this doesn't feel good, this is whatever, then it is conflict.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Thanks so much for offering that. Yeah,
We have a
absolutely.
couple responses in the chat as well,
Oh, great.
using I statements, and then that conflict is natural and human.
Yes, it
And
is.
I would also add, not all conflict needs to be resolved.
Say more.
Um, I remember I had a coach one time, and I was in the midst of a conflict with, one of my kids' parents that I was friends with, and I was like, we have to do this thing. We're gonna be at the softball game. Like, what do I do, right? And like, he was like, sometimes it's just good to practice divine ignorance. And so for me as a confrontational person, right, I tend to want to resolve conflict. And I think that's just part of, our anxiety of like, we shouldn't be in conflict, or, conflict is uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And so just thinking that sometimes we don't always have to resolve every conflict.
Mm-hmm. I feel that. I think when I think about the saying like choose your battles, there are things that I can fully resolve in myself because it doesn't hurt my heart that much. Like it's something that I can just sort of extend grace to and move on. I think where not resolving conflict can create problems if we really aren't able to let it go and it's building up that sort of resentment or creating more space than than we want to have in the relationships that we care about. So I guess that's kind of what comes up for me when I hear that. Anything else, Carrie? Okay.
Nope,
Great.
that's
Okay. The other thing is like there are multiple roles in conflict, right? Sometimes we play one of these, sometimes we play more than one. So generally there is, at least one person who's been hurt. Someone has caused hurt. There might be someone else who witnessed that hurt. Um, and any of these people may respond to it. We won't do this right now, but maybe just jot down this prompt to spend some time at just considering yourself in each of these roles and think about, generally how are you feeling and what is it that you need in each of these. Um, Part of why this is helpful is to remember that we move in and out of these roles, and that generally there are needs, there are ways that we are looking to be supported. There are things that we want to make sure are happening, even if we are just responding or if we cause the hurt in addition to being hurt. So just note that down for yourself. I want to move into, hold on to all of this, and I want to move into exploring power and shared power. So on whatever you were taking notes on, again, respond to this prompt. What do you feel, think, or notice in your body when you consider the term or the concept of shared power? Take a moment or so and just jot some things down. And then just take a look at kind of, what you had identified when we were looking at conflict. And just kind of consider how do your responses compare to what you wrote down or noticed when you were thinking about conflict versus when you think about shared power. And I'd love if a couple people would share, would be willing to put in the chat sort of what's coming up.
We have one offering in the chat, which is reciprocity.
Mm-hmm.
Mutuality is another offering.
Mutuality. Okay.
Trinity.
Trinity, the word Trinity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Would the person who said that be willing to say more? No pressure though.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the fact that it makes me think of the perfect relationship that exists within the divine and how there are three distinct persons who share power mutually.
That was that was an amen moment for me. Thank you for that. Yeah, I love that.
We have a few more.
Right.
Communication, interconnected and shared strengths, and power is relational.
Yes, I love that. Yeah, and all of those words, like when I think about the comparison between what we noted with conflict and what we noted with shared power, like these words and these concepts feel so much more generative, freeing, less scary. And for me, when I think about conflict through the lens of shared power, I realize that, conflict on its own doesn't have to be scary, doesn't have to be isolating, it doesn't have to be something that we fear. I think it depends on how we navigate it, which is also true about power. And so let's just take a little bit of a look into power and what it is. So here are some definitions of power: the ability to get things done, the ability to make or benefit from the rules, the ability to cause or prevent change, access to and or control of resources. When we talk about power, particularly in an organizing way, we talk about power as neutral, as sort of this energy or this tool. And having energy and or a tool in itself is not necessarily good or bad, right? It depends on how that thing is used, what that energy goes towards, how that tool is wielded. And so depending on what we're doing with power, it has the ability to be harmful or helpful, liberative or oppressive. And that depends on the form of power that we're using. So let's look at forms of power. I'm going to start with, we're going to talk about two, and where we're going is shared power, but we're going to start with power over. This is called unilateral power. It's the type of power that in our society we're generally most familiar with, where there's a top and a bottom. The energy is very just like lead, follow, or get out of the way. And this type of power relies on a hierarchy where the top is making the rules, it's setting the standards and the norms, it's determining how others are treated when they are not living up to those rules and standards. And those beneath are made to get on board and or suffer the consequences. This is the type of power that systems of supremacy and oppression are rooted in, like racism and sexism, heterosexism, ableism, etc. And the group that is on top in each of these systems is systematically set up to benefit by having more power and privilege at the detrimental expense of the group or the groups beneath, who are also set up in a systematic way to have less power and therefore be subjected to oppression and marginalization due to that imbalance. Which groups are on the top or the bottom are determined largely by identity, our race, ethnicity, sexuality, gender, ability, etc. Nothing is inherently superior or inferior about our identities, but this system uses our identities to justify itself. So if you see in this chart, it's like a pretty binary way to kind of look at this dynamic, right? Where to the far left, we have the type of oppression or the system of domination. We have the variable that is an identity marker, and then we have the historically and currently included group, the group that would hold more power over and above the historically and currently excluded groups. This is kind of like a basic way just to understand this. And as you find which group or groups correspond to your identity, most likely, most people will find themselves on both sides of the chart. And within each group, you as an individual can be more or less proximate to power based off of various factors about you. Skin color, speaking with an accent or not, which accent it is, how feminine or masculine you present, etc. On this slide, you can see that spectrum, the slide that's on the left. You can see that spectrum a little bit more, where the word power is in the middle, and the groups closest to the center are the ones that are closest to power, and those farther away are the ones pushed to the margins. And this system runs like a well-oiled machine, and we are constantly being conditioned within it, generally on 4 levels. Through our societal culture or ideology, institutionally through the policies, procedures, and laws sort of set by our institutions, through our interpersonal relationships and how we treat each other and interact, and within ourselves based off of what we internalize in all of this conditioning. I want to share some of the characteristics from this type of power and just consider how they connect to conflict specifically. So this type of power, as I said, is unilateral. It is, it functions on a group level, but we can carry it out individually. It creates a hierarchy. It is transactional. This type of power is concealed. It's meant to be or to feel invisible. It insulates and protects itself. It operates through coercion, control, and domination. It incites fear. It produces a culture of avoiding accountability, of blaming others, of creating others. And this type of power is finite. There's only so much of it to go around. And because of that, it creates conditions of scarcity and of hoarding. And even though this type of power operates largely on a group level, because of how, we're all conditioned, it gets replicated on these micro levels in our interpersonal relationships, oftentimes without us even realizing it. And in conflict, we can struggle for power and reenact hurt and harm, where we're just working to sort of switch who's on top and who's on bottom. A over B, B over A. It doesn't really change the system. It just changes who's benefiting and who's getting hurt, right? Instead of working to change the system completely. This quote says, "We live in a world shaped by hundreds of years of collective structural harms, the legacies of brutal colonization, enslavement, heteropatriarchy that shape the culture we live in. That means these patterns have shaped us too, and we must assume they are always present in our relationships. Conflict unveils systemic traumas and the ways oppressive systems and violent people have used power in an extractive way against us across time, space, and generations. When we avoid conflict or move through it carelessly, we end up acting out those structural patterns unconsciously, even if we are from an identity harmed by those systems. Whether or not we have formal power, we can enact subtle and gross forms of anti-Blackness, white supremacy, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, classism, and other structural oppressions. This can end relationships, organizations, and movements. This system harms all of us, and it works to disconnect us from each other, from ourselves, from the earth, from the divine, and it seeps into us in the ways that we deal with conflict. Any questions so far? Would y'all do me a favor and take a deep breath in with me? And blow it out. One more time, breathe in and out. Here's the good news. We can shape and shift power on each of these 4 levels for our good, for our freedom, for our liberation. Tonight, we're focusing on the interpersonal level, like our relationships with each other, but this framework for understanding power over and shared power can impact every level as we take action to change this system. So now we're going to look at shared power, which is my favorite form of power. How do we move in more liberative ways with each other and not just recreate the same systems of domination and harm in our relationships as we carry out this A over B, no, it's B over A, no, it's A over B situation? We do that through utilizing an entirely different form of power called power with or shared power. Remember, if power is neutral, then it's not power in itself that is bad. It's about how we are using it and what power structure we are playing into that matters. If power over is about domination and control for some and oppression and marginalization for others, then shared power is about liberation for all. Here are the characteristics of shared power, and I will invite you to also think about how these can impact conflict. So shared power is also called power with. It's power that we build with each other. It recognizes both individual and group access to power or lack thereof. It also recognizes each person's individual inherent value along with the assets and needs of our group identities. It's intentional, it's countercultural, it's relational and transformational instead of being transactional. It shares information and resources instead of concealing and hoarding. It fosters mutuality and community care. It builds safety and courage and allows for healing. It cultivates self-determination and thriving. It takes accountability. This type of power is infinite, abundant, and expansive. And we can build and utilize this power in big systemic ways when we organize and we create new structures and new policies, but also in the micro ways with our own personal healing and intentional efforts to resist domination, and through our interpersonal relationships and how we treat each other, how we deal with conflict, how we work toward repair with our people. This is the thing that makes me so excited because I believe in the power of the people, and I believe that we can really make an impact in our lives to create conditions that work better for all of us. And I think that if we're mindful about it, if we're intentional about it, then we can recognize that with every interaction that we have and how we move through our life, we can be working to cultivate this different form of power. I love this quote by Grace Lee Boggs. It says, "To make a revolution, people must not only struggle against existing institutions, they must make a philosophical and spiritual leap and become more human beings. In order to change/transform the world, they must change/transform themselves." Questions, responses. Power, shared power, conflict, power over, anything coming up?
We have one reflection in the chat, which is the descriptions for shared power sound a lot like love.
That makes me happy. Yeah, I think so too. It feels like love to me. What else? Okay. I want to give you some time to reflect together or personally, to just sort of think about when you consider power over, what does conflict look like? What characteristics does that type of conflict hold? Some of you may be familiar with characteristics of white supremacy culture, binary thinking, perfectionism, rejecting discomfort. Like it may feel like that, those might be things that are part of your list. You may come up with other things. Your list could just be like, it sounds loud, it sounds hateful. And then which things from that answer are familiar for you, are habits that you lean into, are ways that you have protected yourself? And why do you think that is? And then what is a need that you have when you're in conflict that maybe you could express to the people that you love in connection with this habit and this why? And then also to spend some time thinking about shared power in conflict. What does that type of conflict look like, feel like, sound like? When moving from a shared power framework? What is something from that list that you will create that you're already doing? And what have you noticed? What kind of impact have you noticed that it has on the conflict and on the relationship when you practice? I think that that would be really helpful to share with each other. And then what is maybe a habit or a practice also from that list that you want to cultivate more of? And is there a first step that you can take toward that? So those will be the things that you all will get a chance to discuss in your breakout groups, or as you self-reflect. I know we're coming to a close. And again, y'all, I knew that we were only going to be able to, really start this conversation. There's so much more on the practical side of like, what does this look like and how do we do it? That I want to continue digging into. I do want to leave you with some things that I have found that help me sort of be mindful of shared power as I navigate conflict. So the first one is really about holding the relationship that I want as central. So being really intentional about figuring out what kind of relationship do I want to cultivate with this person, and when we are in conflict, remembering that more than I'm remembering like the thing that they did that I'm really upset about. Like that's important, but the type of relationship that I'm trying to build with them has to be central for me. So that's one. Identifying shared needs. So when you're going to have a conversation or you can feel like things are starting to heat up, being able to pause or come back and say, hey, like I've realized that a tender spot for me, something that's really important, is that you don't cut me off or whatever it is for you, or I feel safe in these ways, and can we agree to honor those and to try to cultivate that as we have this conversation and navigate this conflict, and getting a chance to hear what it is for the other person or people that you're with as well. When hurt happens, recognizing intent, but tending to impact. Sometimes we talk about, not worrying about intent and focusing on the impact. And I think that the intent is actually important. Like, I care if your intention was to hurt me or if it wasn't, and this was just a mistake. But I think that like where we really need to spend the time is where the wounds are. And so holding both of those things, that both and again that we talked about. Asking questions that look for change and not place blame or guilt. This is a really like practical skill that you can practice. What is a question that I could bring that can help us get towards a resolve that is not about blaming, guilting, shaming, but still is getting to the heart of things? Leaning into curiosity instead of assumption and judgment. Listening to understand and not just to respond. This was similar to what was in the chat. So practicing mirroring back or expressing, I heard you say, or am I getting you when you say this? Is there more? It's a really good question to ask. Is there more? And then just like giving yourself and each other room to grow, recognizing that we're not gonna get this perfect. And that has got to be okay, because when it's not, that's when a lot of the ruptures happens. But is there a way that we can hang in there with each other to recognize best intent in each other, to remember and hold on to the love, and to keep coming back to try to work this out with each other? So those are just a few practical tools. And I will close with this quote, and then I'll turn it over to Carrie. Conflict deepens alignment by clarifying our assumptions, motivations, and strategies. Conflict can bring people closer together when we take the risk to reveal our needs and uncomfortable truths and navigate challenges together. We build intimacy and trust. Working through conflict heals and brings us closer to the relationships we need to actually get to our vision. Thanks, y'all.